as always, I'm not saying I know what's best for you, because I don't know your learning style, but consistently small groups, figure it out, or try to give your best estimated inference, and then ask your neighbors, say, hey, what do you got? Oh, we did the same thing, hey, oh, we got something different. That's when education happens. When you get something different, and you're able to express why you feel the way you feel, and they feel the way they feel, man, it sounds like I'm in my feelings. Then that's when you can be like, oh, I see your point, I get it, okay? It doesn't affect your grade to miss it now. So now's the time when it kind of goes learning mishaps, right? Okay, here we go. What do you observe? I start here, and I do this. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What you got? Right, lateral, cervical, bending, correct. Because remember, right and left mean two different things in two different planes. So we have to communicate right lateral for frontal or right transverse for transverse. Okay? All right, how about this one? Take my arms off mine. Oh, by the way, we're going to be interrupted today. My little YouTube star is off of school, so Lucy's going to bring him by, and we'll see what happens. Oh no, man, you just never know, man. He may show up and be like, or just boom. Girls. Okay, right? Now, I'm not saying that there's only one thing that moves. Just what you observe, what you see, you express. Oh, do you mind leaving a little process? Thank you. And again, thank you for letting me know that class was running late today. Okay, ready? What do you observe? Not going back. This is where we start, right? We shake up the edge of sketch. Now, we analyze motion. It was one of your commandments. How do we analyze motion? Joint by joint. So even if there is multiple things happening, you don't tackle it all in one, right? You say, okay, well, let me have a conversation about this first. And then when that's over, let me have a conversation about the other thing that. So don't ever be overwhelmed with multiple things happening. It's really that. Now that could be a task. Shooting the free throw is a task, but the motions that contributed to it happen independently. Okay. How many things did you observe had joint motion, locally referenced motion? 1 or 2? Don't infer my silence as being you're wrong. I'm just giving everybody a chance to have time to kind of talk with the voices in their head. Okay. Well, I know the one that y'all might be kind of thinking about is the neck, right? The cervical. So let's do. Oh, all right. We can knock out 2 birds with 1 stone right here. Straight line, chin to chest, right? If I twist my head, you're not going to see a straight line from chin to chest anymore, right? You're going to see some obliquities and angulation. But when I started here and I did this, you still observe a straight line from chin to chest, right? In other words, my head just went along for the ride. Where was the motion truly happening? In my trunk. And the clues are in the clothing, right? When I do this, you don't see my shirt go anywhere. When I do this, that's how you know that there's angulation. And again, if clothing, I mean, that could be semantical, but even skin is clothing. So, I mean, if you see someone twisting their trunk, you're going to literally see their skin move, just like you would see their clothes move. Right? So this would be left transverse trunk rotation, and my cervical vertebra didn't do anything. Okay. All right, ready for the next one? Or, I'm sorry, are there any follow-up questions to that example before I go to the next one? Okay. Yes, sir.
Any major or minor hip adduction and adduction at the when you're turning?
Let's see what that would look like if I had hip abduction and adduction. First of all, the pelvis is transverse plane. So my only real options for motion in this position are flexion, extension, horizontal AB or AD, or internal external rotation, right? Regular AB and AD, I'm not in a position to do that. That's like being on Interstate 20 and trying to travel on I-10. You know, you gotta go south before you can move on that interstate, right? So this is what horizontal AB and AD duction would look like. Bilateral horizontal ab, bilateral horizontal ad. Right ab and right ad. Right? So you'd have to literally see that stuff happen. So here, everything stayed in place. My pelvis didn't go anywhere. I didn't have any hip motion. And if it was, if I twitched, it was insignificant. Remember, on your test, everything's going to be obvious motion. I'm going to be like, all right, guys, next one. Never going to see that. It's going to be obvious motion. So good question. All right, here we go. We'll get to harder and I say harder and harder, but you know, maybe more illusionary questions. Okay, ready? Now, let me communicate. Again, for me to do the motion, I gotta go back, right? I can't just keep spinning. That would make me possessed. So, so I start here, and I do this, and then I shake the edge to sketch, and I come back, start, finish, start, finish, start, finish. You guys can do it yourself if you wish. You know, I put my arms like this just to make sure you can see, you know, the motion, right? So this is just to enhance the movements. But I just start out like this, and then I twist this way. Remember, you're analyzing my motion, so it's what did you observe that I did. However, you can recreate what I did if you want. Oh, by the way, y'all welcome. Brian is you know, he can be pretty outgoing if you approach him. So after class, if you got a couple minutes, you know, feel free to go chat with him. His birthday party was this weekend, but you know, when I was growing up, like if your birthday was on a Tuesday, you had your party on a Tuesday, right? Back in my day. And so, but his true birthday is tomorrow. All right, here we go. If on the test, if I didn't even ask you to analyze the specific motion, I just said, where was their movement? And I gave you all different kind of answers. You know, like hip and pelvis, pelvis and trunk, you know. Where would you say, hey, I know for a fact there was significant motion where?
Cervical and
Trunk and cervical, good. Trunk and cervical. And then, so we don't tackle both at the same time. We just say, okay, well, if there was motion at trunk and cervical, let's analyze, you know, one and then the other. So let's have the trunk conversation. What did the trunk do? Right transverse trunk rotation. This is right lateral, this is right transverse. Cartwheel to your right, spin to your right. Okay? Now, if I didn't have any cervical motion, this is what would happen. You see the illusion of, whoa, I look to the right, I must have turned my head to the right. No, not necessarily. In fact, what I had to do was, as my trunk is trying to make my head look to the right, I had to look to the left at the same angular velocity in order to keep my eyes fixed on whatever the heck I'm trying to fix it to. In this case, some caffeine. Watching you caffeine. Right? Does everybody understand that this happens a lot? It looks like there is no motion, but there must have been motion, or else you wouldn't have been able to stay looking straight. You had right transverse trunk with left transverse cervical. I went from looking at my sternum to looking more towards my left shoulder. And how does that happen? Left transverse cervical rotation. Cool? Any follow-up questions on that? All right. Let's have some fun. Next up, we're gonna get off the table, go to the floor. If you can't see, see. Make it easy for you. Start, finish. Start, finish. What did I have to move in order to accomplish this functional movement, this overall body movement? Start here, do this. What actually moved? Discuss amongst yourselves. Or, I tell you what, just to make sure you understand what I'm asking you, I'm not going to make you. If you're able and willing, stand up and we'll go over the movement so that way everybody understands what I'm asking. I'm not even going to look at you. Okay? So stand up if you want to recreate it with me. All right, guys, grapevine, here we go. I'm going to pivot on my right leg. I'm going to take a step back. Notice how my foot is now like at a right angle. My 2 feet are at a right angle now. So I start here, I do this. My sternum is still facing, my chin and my sternum still facing the wall. My collarbones are still facing the chalkboard is what I'm in. My pelvis is now facing the left side of class. See if you can figure out what move. Now, I'm leaving it open-ended because I want you to say, oh, did that move, did this move, did that move? I want you to have that conversation. And if the answer is no, then you move on. And if the answer is yes, then you follow up with how. I mean, no disrespect. Just want everybody to have it. All right, guys, here we go. If I asked you on the test to identify joint motions, movements of joints, and remember joints, syn, amphi, diaphragm, capsule, right? So pelvic girdle rotations is a conceptual movement, but it's not a joint motion, right? The joints are hips, trunk, elbow joint. So just be mindful that I will specifically ask you for pelvic girdle perspectives. And I might say, how did the pelvis rotate, and then how did the right hip, left hip, whatever. But just remember, joint motion doesn't encapsulate the pelvis. So let's first talk about joint motions. Let's have a conversation of the actual joints that might have changed position when I started here and I did this. Okay. Here's my deck, I'm shuffling, I'm like, pick a joint, any joint. What's that? Hip? All right. Do you see how it would be tempting to say the left hip did something, right? Because you see it moving, right? But in your now more developed kinesiology minds, can you make a case that the left hip had no motion, right? In other words, it's stayed in its anatomical position. Or another way to look at it is, if I had a cast on my left leg and I couldn't move it even if I wanted to, I could still do this and just go along for the ride. Does that make sense? So I had left hip, nothing. You'll get nothing. But my right hip did something. So watch, here's another way to look at it. I'm gonna reference my feet from my thumbs. Now, I know my feet doesn't make up my hip joint, but when I move the distal part of my femur, you see how those things disassociate, right? And when I move the top part, you see how those things disassociate? So let's check out that left hip. Did those things disassociate? Are they still lined up? You see it? Maybe that's a good tool for you to use. Now let's look at the right hip. Whoa, I had change there, right? Okay, so did I have joint motion? Yes. If so, how? Right hip, external rotation. We good? Okay, now what else did you observe had motion? The trunk. Because if the trunk had no motion, let me do a disassociation. Trunk to pelvis, pelvis to trunk. This looks silly, I know. No disassociation. But I had association, right? All right, disassociation. I'm not an English major. So how did my trunk rotate? Well, I've been doing this for a long time, guys, so I can see that it's right transverse. But if you're like, I'm not quite sure because the pelvis spun to the left, it's okay. Just remember, if you know how you have to move to go back home, you can infer how you had to move when you left. So here, I'm starting lined up. I'm starting in anatomical position. And if you're like, I know I moved from anatomical, but I'm not sure how, then just say, okay, well, how would I have to twist my trunk to go home? Wouldn't I have to twist to the left to go home? Because I had to twist to the right to keep my functional circle of reach and grip inside. So I had right transverse trunk when I did this. We're good? I don't think my neck did any of that. My neck didn't have to do anything because the canceling out was enough by the trunk. But if I had to go enough where my trunk had to start going along for the ride because I run out of motion, well, then I might have to get a little extra motion at my neck if I want to keep my eye on somebody. Okay? All right, now let's talk about pelvic girdle rotations. How did the pelvis spin? To the left. Left transverse. All right? Now, here's the million-dollar question. What was the limiting factor? What was the actual reason? I gave you an example that I had pelvic girdle rotation, but I had hip motion and I had trunk motion. But what actually made the pelvis spin? Was it the trunk or was it the hip? The hip. Specifically the right hip. It was the muscles in my right hip that spun the basketball. Because without that, my pelvis wouldn't go anywhere. I could twist the trunk and the pelvis doesn't have to go anywhere. But until my hip externally rotated, that's what actually spun the pelvis. Okay? You ready for another one, or do y'all want any follow-up questions on that one? I don't mean to rush you. Yes, sir. Yeah, absolutely. See, we don't really think about the feet being fixed unless like we have straps on them, right? But our feet are anchored through friction, right? Because we have the center of the planet. It's most people think the center of the core of the earth is like liquid. It's not. It's like, because of the pressure, there's like solid nickel metal down there. It's super cool. And it wants to meet you. right? So the ground isn't pulling down on me, because if I snap my fingers through Harry Potter magic and there was a tunnel a mile deep, I'd right through the ground, right? So it's the center of the planet trying to pull down on me, and the ground is actually preventing me from going meet it. So you have this compressionary influence from the center of the planet pulling down, the ground pushing up. That's what friction is. Friction is, what are the two surfaces made of and how much are they compressed together? And so because I have the center of the planet pulling me down, and I have this carpet pushing up, and I have imperfections in the carpet, and I have imperfections in my shoes, it is a recipe for friction. And with friction, right, you can do a lot of cool things. Friction is the reason you move around. So this is, yes, anchored. Not because of any straps, but because of friction. Anybody, bless you, anybody watch the Saints just absolutely destroy the Bears yesterday? I apologize for all of you who are from Chicago. I mean no disrespect. But they made an emphasis that Coach Payton didn't give them a choice. They were putting on screw-in cleats, right? Because it was kind of damp, you know, it was kind of muggy, whatever. to help anchor as they're trying to cut and move around. You don't need any anchors to go up, but if it's perpendicular to up, whether that's here, 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 you better have something that's fixing your lower extremity for you to have efficient motion perpendicular to the compression. Good question. All right, we're ready for the next one? Okay, here we go. Can everybody see the center yellow good? Okay, all right. This is going to be subtle, all right? Lord help me. Leap like a freak. It's an inside joke with my boys, I'm sorry. When we're wrestling, we're like, leap like a freak, and they'll jump on top of me. And I'm like, ah, I'm protecting myself. They get after it. Okay, ready? Subtle. I go from here to there. What you laughing at? Here, how you doing? To there, how you doing? Now, I'm not doing, I'm not accentuating it, because eventually we got to get those training wheels off, and you just have to be able to see what's happening when you shift your weight, or I shift my weight, or you visualize me shifting your weight, or you pretend you're me and you shift your weight from left leg to the right leg. And this is an open-ended question. Tell me what you observed. Tell me what you saw. From here, so this is my start position, to there. So this is what Shaq feels like, huh? Man, I'd be afraid to step on somebody called Shaq. Like that running back to the Bears.
Did you see the stuff on Twitter? The stuff on Twitter.
Okay, so let's just make sure, if you're mimicking my motion, let's make sure you have your weight on your left leg to start, okay, with this question. Your weight bearing mostly on your left. Look, it's not that you're not touching with the right, but you know what the right is? The right's kind of like a kickstand. Meaning that for a motorcycle, most of the weight is on the tires, but the kickstand just kind of keeps it balanced a little bit. That's what it is. My right leg is just my kickstand. And then I'm going to shift it on the right side, and now my left leg's the kickstand. It's kind of keeping me from falling over, just a little bit. Here to there. Bless you. Now, we're going to inverse the questions. I'm going to first start off by asking you pelvic girdle rotation, and then from there we'll work off of joint motions, and then limiting factor of spinning the pelvis. The discuss, or y'all have y'all are down? We're good? Okay, I'm gonna let y'all dictate the conversation. Well, I kind of dictated the conversation. Pelvic girdle first. What did the pelvis do when I went from here to there? Remember, this is not pelvic girdle translation. This is pelvic girdle rotation. So let's mimic. Let's see what I got. Would you say that in this position I'm pouring water out the right side? How is the spin? Left lateral. So the illusion is that you may miss it because you're like, well, whoa, you're shifting to the right side. And I'm like, whoa, you're right. But that has nothing to do with rotation. This is about the rotation, not the translation. And so this is, it was from a question on Friday. So this is in essence what the pelvis is doing. The pelvis starts here, and the pelvis is doing this and this. It's just doing it at the same time. That's general motion. But the question isn't about this part. The question is about that part. Left lateral. Just curious, who sees it better with visualizing pouring out the sides, okay? Who visualizes it like when I do with the basketball? Like if it was going to spin, how would it keep spinning? Because if you think about it, if it spun, it would roll to the left. It would do a left cartwheel. Nobody? Okay, stop using basketball. All right, one. Okay, I'm going to keep using basketball. So left lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Any questions about that? About the PGR? Okay. Yes, sir.
Did you say frontal plane?
You're multitasking like a champ right there. We got.
Did you say left lateral frontal plane rotation?
Yeah. Because then you'd be redundant. It's a great question, but you would be redundant because left lateral already infers from a plane in terms of the way the pelvic girdle is spinning, right? So we would just be, we'd be adding a double, I say a double negative, but you'd be saying the same thing twice, right? Okay. It's a good question. So left lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Let's talk about joint motions from the hips perspective. What you get? First of all, can everybody, to me, if you can see why you would want to say something, it's easy to see why it is the way it is. In other words, it's like understanding your opponent's weaknesses helps you to maximize what you need to do as a strength. So seeing that both hips are moving, true, and both hips are responsible for the pelvic girdles rotating the same way, true, but that doesn't mean the hips are both doing the same thing. See what I mean by that? Okay. What position do my hips start out in? My left hip starts out adducted and my right hip starts out abducted. Does everybody agree with that? And then I do this. So my left hip went from being to being So I had to have left hip ab and right hip add from my hips perspective. Does everybody understand that? Cool? Now, if my trunk didn't do anything, this is what it would look like. How you doing? How you doing? Oh, how you doing? Look, they may do that somewhere south of Perry, Louisiana. But my mom's from Intercoastal City, so I can say that. What is my trunk gonna do so that I don't have to do this? Yeah, my trunk's gonna bend, my trunk's gonna lean. It's like our body's natural shocks in a car, where when cars first came around and you found, we can move things down here, but yet keep, it's like a waiter or a waitress, man, that's carrying around drinks, and they're shifting and they're gliding and they're moving and bumping into people, and the drinks stay level, right? It's the same thing. I might be shifting and moving and doing stuff down here, but because I can kind of bend and flex and lateral bend, I can kind of keep things level. You don't want any drink pouring out of your glass, and your eyes don't want to go to the side because it's hard to process data. We want level eyes. So what did my trunk do? Well, I started out left laterally bent, and I ended up right laterally bent. So how did my trunk have to bend? Right lateral. Right lateral trunk bend. Did my cervical have to do anything? Well, not here, because my trunk kind of did it for me, right? But if I'd go crazy, like if I went really far and my trunk's like, that's all I got, man, you know, then you might have to give a little extra on your neck to keep your eyes open. Okay? Can I get that? Yay. Terrified of heights. Hey. All right, how about another one? This is, I would say, level, we're approaching level 9 to 10 difficulty here, okay? And,
Dog.
yeah.
Doesn't the ankle move on that last one?
Yeah, I'm not saying, I'm not disrespecting the subtalar joint,
Yeah.
but we were just trying to work on the middle part. So yeah, anytime there's something that does move, it's not that, and feel free to be like, hey, can we talk about the subtalar? Can we talk about absolutely. But because I introduced you to pelvic girdles and trunk stuff, that's what the focus of the conversation is. So I didn't mean to disrespect it, it's just not what the purpose of the conversation is today. Okay, good point. All right, guys, this is all of the examples so far were with the legs nice and straight. So what I'd like for you to take notice of is that the pelvis still has perspective. I'm in two different hip positions, right? Similar knee positions, but two different hip positions. And now I'm going to move the pelvis, and your job is to tell me what you observe. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Cramp. This is tough, so I'm really going out of my way to try to show you what the pelvis is doing. The pelvic rotation is actually the easier part. Hard part is the hip stuff and or the trunk stuff. That's not easy. So I'm going to go ahead and give you the pelvic girdle rotation. I'm telling you that I took the pelvis and I poured water out the right side. I had right lateral pelvic girdle rotation. Your job is to figure out what happened at the hips and or what happened at the trunk. Go.
Right.
Ah! La 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 la. Don't pick on me. Trying to get you. You could write it down. You could write it down. And then you can hit the time. Guys, if you want to recreate it, I was on my right knee. Okay, if you want to recreate it, I was on my right knee. And I went from a neutral pelvis to pouring water out the right side.
You said you were on your right knee?
Yep,
Right knee.
like this.
Okay.
We can have that conversation. Did you see something happen?
But to clarify the conversation that I asked you guys to have, we can have a conversation. Answer what I asked you, because I'm not disrespecting that, I'm disrespecting what I'm trying to see. By the time you finish studying for this, y'all gonna all be experts in Elvis, man. Y'all gonna put in some old Elvis tapes. Actually, that would be a great Halloween costume, Elvis Stitch. Huh? You Stitch fans out there? Stitch.